I can still picture it like it happened yesterday. My birthday dinner, the low candlelight flickering across the table, and my wife sitting across from me with a smug little smirk curling at the corners of her lips. Madison. That was her name. The woman I'd spent the last 10 years of my life with, the woman I thought I knew inside and out. She reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope, and slid it toward me, her nails tapping against the paper as if she were handing me something precious. "Happy birthday, babe," she said, her voice sweet as honey, her head tilting just slightly like she was about to unveil the surprise of a lifetime. I hesitated, staring at the envelope. Madison was never big on gifts. If I was lucky, she'd grab a generic cologne set or a gift card from the checkout aisle at the grocery store. But this was different. My fingers brushed over the thick, high-quality paper, my gut tightening with unease. This wasn't a birthday card. It wasn't even a letter. It was legal. Official. Divorce papers. The words might as well have been written in fire for how quickly they burned through me. But I didn't react, didn't let her see a single flicker of emotion cross my face. I lifted my gaze to hers, waiting. Maybe this was a joke. A cruel, twisted joke that would end with her laughing and saying, "Gotcha!" But Madison's smirk remained, her posture relaxed as she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table like she was having a casual chat. "I think it's time," she said with a tiny shrug, like she was talking about redecorating the living room. "I've already signed everything. All you have to do is add your name, and it's done." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my expression unreadable. I tilted my head, studying her, like a scientist observing a lab rat under a microscope. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't sad or regretful. She wasn't even pretending to feel guilty. And that could only mean one thing. She wasn't leaving me because we had grown apart. She had someone else. And I knew exactly who. Logan. That was his name. Some hotshot real estate mogul she had met at a networking event a year ago. The same name I had seen pop up on her phone more times than I could count. Late-night texts. Muffled phone calls. The sudden business trips she took with barely a word of explanation. She thought I didn't notice. She thought I was blind. I noticed everything. Madison was still talking, feeding me some rehearsed speech about how we had changed, how this was the best thing for both of us, how she needed to find herself. I barely heard her. My mind was already racing ahead, already calculating. She expected me to break, to beg, to fall apart like some pitiful, heartbroken fool. But instead, I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made her brows pinch together ever so slightly. "Wait till your lover sees this," I murmured, sliding the divorce papers back across the table. For the first time that night, her smirk wavered. Her fingers twitched around the stem of her wine glass, but she quickly recovered, her expression sharpening. "Excuse me," she asked, her tone shifting, too sharp, too defensive. I leaned back in my chair, stretching out like I didn't have a care in the world. "Oh, nothing," I said lazily. "Just thinking about how Logan's going to react when he finds out what's really going on." Madison's posture stiffened. "What are you talking about?" I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, mocking the way she used to say it to me, the way she would try to soothe me when she thought I was being dramatic. "You really thought you were the only one keeping secrets, didn't you?" Her face paled. And for the first time, I saw it, the flicker of fear. She had spent the last year planning this. Slipping away. Crafting her perfect little escape where she left me behind like yesterday's garbage and rode off into the sunset with Logan. But she had no idea. No idea what I knew. No idea what I had done. And she had no idea what was coming next. Madison's fingers clenched around the stem of her wine glass as she processed my words. She was trying to keep her composure, but I could see it, the flicker of unease, the slight tremor in her hands. She thought she had it all figured out. She had spent months, maybe even a year, carefully orchestrating this moment, convinced that she was in complete control. She had no idea. "Stephen," she said, her voice measured now, cautious. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back, stretching my arms like this was just another boring Tuesday night. "You're not as clever as you think, Madison." I let my fingers drum against the table, watching her closely. "You think this little speech of yours is going to catch me off guard? That I didn't notice the late nights? The so-called business trips? The way you suddenly started dressing like you were auditioning for The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills?" Her grip tightened on the glass. "You're being ridiculous." I smiled. "Am I?" She swallowed hard, but I wasn't done. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen lazily. Then I turned it toward her. Her breath hitched. There, displayed in full color, was a photo of her, taken from across the street, right in front of Logan's upscale penthouse. Her car, parked outside. Her, stepping into the building, her expression almost giddy with excitement. I swiped to the next image. This time, it was her and Logan at a secluded rooftop restaurant. His hand resting a little too low on her back. Her leaning into him, gazing up at him like he was the only man in the world. Swipe. Madison entering a hotel, hand in hand with Logan. Her wedding ring, nowhere to be seen. She gasped, her hand flying out like she was going to snatch the phone away, but I yanked it back before she could touch it. "Where? How?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're terrible at covering your tracks," I said, clicking the screen off and slipping the phone back into my pocket. "Honestly, I didn't even have to try that hard." She shook her head, her breathing uneven. This isn't fair," she stammered. "You had someone spy on me?" I let out a low chuckle. "Spy on you? No, sweetheart. I just paid attention." Madison's nostrils flared, and for the first time, her carefully constructed confidence started to crack. She had walked into this dinner thinking she was in control, thinking she was the one holding all the cards. But I had rewritten the script. She straightened her shoulders, trying to pull herself together. "So what now, Stephen?" she asked, her voice clipped. "You think you can use those pictures against me? What's your grand plan?" I smirked. "I don't need to use them against you, Madison." I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough to make her shift uncomfortably in her seat. "But I will make sure your perfect little future doesn't go as smoothly as you planned." A flicker of fear crossed her face. "Logan won't care," she spat. "He already knows about you." I laughed softly. "Oh, I know he does. He just doesn't know everything." She inhaled sharply. "What do you mean?" I tilted my head, pretending to think for a moment. "Did you ever tell him about your spending habits?" I mused. She blinked. "What? About your credit cards?" I continued, watching her closely. "The joint accounts? The investments under your name?" I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "Oh, and let's not forget about that little vacation house in Palm Beach you bought, with my money." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "That's right, Madison." I knew. She had spent the last year planning her escape, draining money, shifting assets, thinking she was setting herself up for a new life. She thought she was untouchable. But she had left a trail. A messy, reckless trail. And I had followed it every step of the way. Her whole body stiffened, and she quickly tried to mask her panic. But I saw it, that moment of sheer, unfiltered fear. "I don't know what you think you're going to do, Stephen," she said, forcing herself to sound calm, "but if you think you can ruin my life, you're wrong." I stood up slowly, smoothing my jacket, watching her like a predator sizing up its prey. Then I leaned in, close enough to see her pupils dilate with panic. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured, my voice dripping with amusement. "I don't think I can ruin your life." I let the words hang in the air before delivering the final twist of the knife. "I know I can." Her lips parted, but before she could speak, I grabbed the divorce papers from the table, folded them neatly, and slid them into my pocket. "Thanks for the gift," I said, flashing her a wink. "Let's see how your boyfriend feels about his little surprise." And with that, I turned and walked out the door, leaving my wife sitting there, clutching her glass of wine with shaking hands. For the first time in her life, she had no control over what happened next. And I was just getting started. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of the restaurant, but I barely felt it. My heart wasn't pounding with anger or grief, it was something else entirely. Satisfaction. Madison had walked into that dinner believing she had already won. In her mind, I was supposed to be the pitiful, heartbroken husband, blindsided and powerless while she moved on without a care. She thought I'd sign those divorce papers without a fight, let her rewrite history, and fade into the background. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, I stared up at the house I had built, the house she had turned into nothing more than a trophy for her ego. At one point, it had meant something. It had been filled with warmth, laughter, lazy Sunday mornings wrapped up in each other. But now it was just another prop in her carefully staged performance. And soon, that performance was coming to an end. I stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and let my eyes scan the living room. The expensive furniture, the curated artwork, the imported rugs, it had all been hand-selected by Madison. Not for comfort. Not for us. For image. For status. For the life she wanted everyone to think she had. But none of it mattered anymore. Because by the time I was done, she wouldn't have anything left. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and made a call I had been planning for weeks. It rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "You ready?" A slow smirk tugged at my lips. "More than ready." The next morning, I was in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, when I heard the front door slam so hard the picture frames rattled against the walls. "What the hell did you do?" Madison's voice was shrill, laced with pure panic. I didn't look up. Just took another slow sip, savoring the moment. "Morning, sweetheart," I said smoothly. "Sleep well." She came storming into the kitchen, her hair a mess, eyes blazing, clutching her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. "Don't play games with me, Stephen," she snapped. "Logan just called me, furious. He said all his credit cards were frozen. His bank accounts wiped out. And he just lost a contract worth millions overnight." I raised an eyebrow, feigning mild interest. "Damn. Tough break." Her breath hitched. And then, I saw it, the flicker of realization. "You," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "You did this." I set my mug down with deliberate ease. "You really thought I was going to sit back and let you screw me over?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "You thought I wouldn't fight back?" Her hands balled into fists. "You had no right." A cold laugh escaped me. "No right." I stepped closer, my voice lowering just enough to send a shiver down her spine. "You were planning to rob me, Madison. You did rob me. But you made one mistake." She swallowed hard, her shoulders rigid. "And what mistake was that?" she asked, her voice clipped. I smirked. "You got greedy." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. I took another slow sip of my coffee. "See, sweetheart, Logan isn't just some rich idiot who throws money around," I continued. "He's a man who thrives on power. A man who surrounds himself with people he can control." I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "And guess what? I just took all of that away from him." Her breath hitched. She stepped back slightly, like she was trying to create space between us, as if that could undo what had already been done. "You don't know what you've just started," she whispered. I chuckled. "Oh, but I do." She inhaled sharply, and for the first time since she smugly handed me those divorce papers, she looked scared. "Logan isn't someone you can just screw over and walk away from, Stephen," she said, her voice shaking. "You think you've won, but you have no idea who you're dealing with." I let out a slow exhale. "Let him come." Her face twisted in frustration. "This isn't a joke," she snapped. "You think ruining his career, his finances, his entire life is something you can just walk away from?" I tilted my head. "Didn't you try to do the exact same thing to me?" She sucked in a breath, her nails digging into the edge of the counter. I took another sip, watching her like a cat watching a trapped mouse. "Funny how that works, huh?" She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling. The second she pulled it out and saw the name flashing across the screen, her face drained of color. "Logan. And he wasn't calling for a casual chat." I smirked. "Better answer that," I murmured. "I have a feeling your perfect little life just went up in flames." She hesitated. Then, with shaking fingers, she swiped the screen. "L. Logan," she stammered. I didn't need to hear the other side of the call to know exactly what was happening. Logan Whitmore was unraveling. I could hear the rage spilling through the speaker, his voice booming even from across the room. Madison flinched, stammering out desperate apologies, but Logan wasn't listening. He was furious. He was threatening her now. Her hands shook as she clutched the phone, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the counter. And I just stood there, sipping my coffee, watching as her world collapsed around her. This wasn't how she thought things would go. She had spent the last year orchestrating her escape, crafting the perfect lie, playing me for a fool. But now, standing in my kitchen, with the man she betrayed me for screaming at her over the phone, she wasn't in control anymore. And there wasn't a damn thing she could do to change that. Madison's hand trembled as she clutched the phone to her ear, her eyes darting between me and the kitchen floor like she was searching for an escape route. "Logan, please, just listen to me," she pleaded, her voice barely steady. But I already knew it was useless. I could hear his rage through the speaker, even from where I was standing. Logan Whitmore wasn't a man who handled failure well, and right now, he was realizing just how thoroughly I had burned his empire to the ground. Madison let out a shaky breath, nodding quickly as if he could see her. I don't know how this happened. A sharp voice cut her off, and whatever Logan was saying on the other end made her flinch like she had been physically struck. Her fingers dug into the counter. I had never seen her look so powerless. I took another sip of coffee, watching the scene unfold like a spectator at a play. She had spent years making me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I was some fool she had outgrown. She had planned every step of her escape, convinced that she had outsmarted me. And now, her perfect new life was crumbling before her eyes. It was poetic, really. Finally, she whispered, Okay, I'll fix this." She swiped to end the call and let out a slow, shuddering breath before turning to face me. Her expression had changed. The panic was still there, but she was trying, desperately, to rebuild the confidence she had lost. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she said, forcing her voice to steady. "You think this little stunt is going to ruin me?" I raised an eyebrow, amused by her attempt to regain control. "No, sweetheart," I said calmly. "I know it will." Her nostrils flared. "You don't understand what you've done. Logan, he's not someone you just cross and walk away from." I tilted my head slightly. "And you think I'm scared of him?" Madison exhaled sharply, her hands curling into fists. "You should be. He's dangerous, Stephen. He's connected. He's not going to let this slide." I leaned forward, placing my mug down on the counter with deliberate ease. "Then let him come," I said smoothly. "Because I promise you, Madison, I'm more dangerous than he is." For the first time, her confidence wavered again. Because deep down, she knew I wasn't bluffing. She had spent so long thinking she knew me, thinking she could manipulate me, break me, control me. But that man she thought she knew, the one who would have done anything to keep her, who would have begged for answers, who would have fallen apart the second she walked away. That man was dead. All that was left was someone she had never met before. Someone she had created with her lies and betrayal. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand straighter. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "You got what you wanted. You ruined him. But if you think this means you win—" I let out a sharp laugh. "Win?" I echoed, shaking my head. "Madison, I didn't just ruin Logan. I destroyed everything you built with him. You spent a year scheming, planning your perfect escape, thinking you'd just toss me aside and move on without consequences." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "But now, you have nothing." Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to find a way out, a way to salvage what was left. But there was no escape. For once, she was trapped. Her phone buzzed violently in her hand. She glanced at the screen, and the flicker of fear in her eyes told me exactly who it was. "Logan. Calling again." I smirked. "Better take that," I murmured. "Something tells me he's not in the mood for excuses." She hesitated for a split second before rejecting the call and tossing her phone onto the counter. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw something I had never expected to see in her. Not just fear. Regret. Real, genuine regret. Not because she missed me. Not because she cared about what she had done. But because, for the first time, she understood the price of her betrayal. The game was over. And she had lost. Madison stood there, her body rigid, her breathing uneven. The smug, untouchable woman who had once sat across from me at that dinner, sliding those divorce papers over with a smirk, was gone. Now, in her place, was someone who was rapidly realizing she had no way out. But even now, she wasn't ready to accept defeat. She took a slow, measured breath, forcing the panic in her expression to melt into something else, something more calculating. "Okay, Stephen," she said, her voice suddenly softer, almost reasonable. "You've made your point." I raised an eyebrow. "Have I?" She nodded, running a hand through her hair, as if trying to compose herself. "You wanted revenge, and you got it," she said. "You took everything from Logan. You humiliated me. You got your win." I tilted my head slightly. "And—" Her lips curled into something that almost resembled a smile. "And now we can stop this," she said, taking a slow step toward me. "We don't have to keep going down this road, Stephen. We can end this peacefully." A quiet chuckle rumbled from my chest. "Peacefully," I repeated. "You didn't seem too interested in peace when you handed me divorce papers like a birthday gift." She stiffened, but quickly covered it up. "I was wrong," she admitted, dropping her gaze just slightly. I handled things the wrong way. I should have been honest with you from the start. But that doesn't mean we have to keep hurting each other." I studied her for a long moment. "Let me guess," I murmured. "Now that your perfect life is burning to the ground, you suddenly want to negotiate?" Her jaw clenched. "I just don't want things to get any worse. For you." She exhaled sharply. "For both of us, Stephen." I let out a low laugh. "No, sweetheart. You are the one who's worried about things getting worse." I leaned forward slightly. "Me? I'm enjoying the show." A flicker of frustration crossed her face, but then she tried another tactic. "Stephen," she said, softer this time. "We were together for 10 years. We don't have to do this. I made mistakes, but she swallowed, as if forcing herself to say the words. "But I don't want to destroy you. We can walk away from this both intact." I smirked. "You really think you still have leverage, don't you?" Madison's lips pressed together tightly. "I think we can come to an understanding." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "All right, sweetheart," I said. "Tell me, what exactly do you have to bargain with?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was quick, but I caught it. Then, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. My stomach tensed slightly, but I didn't let it show. She tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward me. I glanced down, and there it was. A series of bank transactions. My transactions. Money transfers, accounts, financial records that, taken out of context, could easily be twisted into something that looked very bad. I kept my face blank, but inside, my mind was already running through every possible angle. "Where did you get this?" I asked evenly. Madison smirked. The first real smirk I'd seen from her since this whole thing started. "Oh, Stephen," she said, tilting her head. "Did you really think I wouldn't have an insurance policy?" I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the counter. "And what exactly are you planning to do with this?" She shrugged. "Well, that depends." She slipped her phone back into her pocket. "If you decide to really push me, I might have to send it to the right people." I let out a soft chuckle. "So that's your big move? Blackmail." She smiled. "Call it what you want, but it's simple. If you keep coming after me, Stephen, I'll take you down with me." I studied her for a moment, watching the way her shoulders squared, the way her chin lifted slightly. She thought she had just flipped the board. She thought she had won. Finally, I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "You know what, Madison?" I murmured. "You almost had me." Her smirk faltered slightly. "Excuse me." I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough to make her brows furrow. "I almost believed you still had control," I admitted. She blinked. "Stephen." "But you forgot something," I interrupted. She frowned. "And what's that?" I pulled my own phone from my pocket, tapped the screen once, and then slid it across the counter toward her. Her expression flickered with hesitation, but eventually she reached for it. She picked it up. She looked at the screen. And just like that, her world came crashing down. Madison's fingers tightened around my phone as she stared at the screen. Her eyes flickered across the information, her breath hitching with every second that passed. And then, her face drained of all color. She blinked. Once. Twice. As if trying to convince herself that what she was seeing wasn't real. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. This isn't possible." "Oh, but it is," I murmured, watching her carefully. "And that's just the beginning." Her hands trembled as she scrolled, scanning the documents, the emails, the records. Everything. Every secret bank account. Every financial misstep. Every under-the-table deal she thought she had buried so well. And at the bottom of each and every one, her signature. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. How did you get this?" she croaked. I smirked, leaning against the counter. "You weren't the only one gathering evidence, sweetheart." She lifted her eyes to mine, and for the first time since this entire game began, I saw something in her gaze that wasn't manipulation or calculation. I saw fear. You knew," she whispered. I let out a soft chuckle. "I knew the moment you started planning to leave me," I said casually. "You thought you were being careful, Madison. But you were sloppy. Too focused on your grand exit. Too confident that I'd never fight back." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I took a slow step forward. "While you were sneaking off with Logan, shifting money, forging paperwork. I was watching. Learning. And let me tell you, finding your offshore accounts? Laughably easy." Her body went rigid. "Oh yeah," I continued. "That little account in your maiden name? The one you were hoping to slip away with once you and Logan were settled? That's already been flagged." I tilted my head, watching the way her breathing picked up. "So, if I were you, I'd stop worrying about what I might do to you." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "I'd start worrying about the IRS." Madison's breath came out in short, shallow gasps. "You're lying," she whispered. I shrugged. "Am I?" She shook her head, gripping the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You wouldn't do this, Stephen," she said, her voice desperate now. "We were together for 10 years. I smirked. "And yet, you were ready to destroy me." Her face twisted with something raw, something bordering on regret. I made a mistake," she choked out. "I thought." "You thought you could control me," I cut in smoothly. "You thought I'd crumble. You thought you'd get the perfect exit, the perfect new life." I let my gaze run over her, taking in the mess of emotions playing across her face. "But now, you get to watch everything burn." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. What do you want?" she rasped. I let out a low chuckle. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured. "It's not about what I want anymore." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the divorce papers, the very ones she had smugly handed me at dinner. Except this time, I held all the power. "You're going to sign over your share of the house to me," I said, my voice calm. "You're going to walk away with nothing. No alimony. No payout. No access to our accounts." Madison sucked in a sharp breath. "And," I added, my tone dropping to something darker, more lethal, "you're going to withdraw that little threat you made against me. Because if you don't—" I leaned in until our faces were only inches apart. "I will personally hand over everything I have on you. And trust me, Madison, your fraud trail won't be as easy to explain as mine." She trembled, her lips parting as if she wanted to argue, to fight. But she knew. She had lost. There was no way out. After several long moments, her shoulders finally slumped. She let out a shaky breath, grabbed the pen I had laid out, and with trembling fingers she signed. her house, her money, her power, gone. When she finished, she sat motionless, staring at the papers in front of her like they had just sealed her fate. And they had. "What now?" she whispered. I folded the signed documents neatly, tucking them into my pocket. Then I turned toward the door, not bothering to look back. "Now," I said simply, "now you get to live the life you chose." And with that, I walked out, leaving Madison Carter sitting in the ruins of the life she had destroyed. 1 week later, I stood outside the house, my house, watching as the last of Madison's things were loaded into a moving truck. She was gone. No money, no career. And after everything I had leaked about her financial fraud, she was blacklisted in every social and business circle she once thrived in. And Logan, he had cut her off immediately. The moment the scandal hit, he did what men like him always do, threw her under the bus to save himself. The last I heard, Madison was staying at a run-down extended-stay motel on the edge of town, barely scraping by with what little she had left. Poetic, really. She had spent years looking down on me. And now, she was beneath me. I smirked to myself, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt alive again. And I couldn't wait to see what came next. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.